What if the movie that finally scratches the Taken itch for action fans is not a polished Liam Neeson-style rescue thriller at all, but a savage martial arts warzone that looks like it wants to break every bone in the room on the way to the ending? Because that is exactly the energy coming off The Furious, and after seeing the trailer and the early critical response, I think this movie might be one of the clearest examples of a familiar premise getting reborn through sheer brutality, choreography, and commitment. On paper, the setup is almost deceptively simple. A father watches his daughter get taken. He gives chase, fails, and is left gasping in the street with nothing but panic and rage. He crosses paths with a journalist named Naveen, a man carrying his own version of loss. And together they start digging into a criminal underworld tied to disappearances, trafficking, and a structure of violence much bigger than either of them expected. If you stop there, it sounds like the skeleton of a dozen revenge thrillers we have seen before. That is where the Liam Neeson comparison comes from, and it is not wrong. The emotional trigger is the same. A loved one is taken, and the rest of the movie becomes an escalating refusal to accept helplessness. But where Taken built its identity on speed, efficiency, and the cool threat of a man with a very particular set of skills, The Furious looks like it is taking that same core engine and feeding it into a completely different machine. This thing is not sleek. It is not tidy. It is not interested in restraint. It looks vicious. The trailer makes that clear almost immediately. Once Wang Wei and Naveen start following the trail, the film stops behaving like a conventional rescue thriller and starts mutating into something much harsher. We are not just talking about fists and kicks. The footage is packed with hammers, blades, arrows, pipes, and whatever else people can get their hands on when survival and revenge stop playing by civilized rules. And because this is coming from Kenji Tanigaki, that violence does not look random. It looks designed, precise, rhythmic, cruel in ways that are very obviously choreographed by someone who understands that action is not just movement, it is storytelling through impact. That is why the early Rotten Tomatoes score matters here, not because scores are everything. They are not, but because when a movie this aggressive, this specifically built for action heads, starts its run at 100% with critics, that tells me it is not just hitting the crowd-pleasing buttons. It is actually landing with people who know how quickly this genre can become repetitive when the choreography, pacing, and emotional drive are not all locked together. Right now, The Furious is sitting at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the write-ups behind that score all seem to circle the same idea. The action is ferocious, inventive, and genuinely special, and honestly, that track stop because the biggest thing this trailer sells is not plot. It is confidence. The film acts like it knows exactly what people are showing up for and has no intention of apologizing for giving it to them in excess. That excess is probably the key to the whole experience. One of the strongest reactions to The Furious out of TIFF was that the movie leaves you exhausted in a good way. Not bored, not numb, exhausted. That is a great sign for a film like this. It means the movie is not coasting on a cool premise and a couple of decent set pieces. It is throwing itself at the audience over and over again until the cumulative effect becomes part of the point. The reports out of Toronto made a huge deal out of the sheer amount of action packed into the runtime, and more importantly, how Kenji Tanigaki reportedly manages to integrate that action into an actual emotional journey. Instead of just stapling scenes together, that is where this movie separates itself from empty imitation, because anybody can do a kidnapped child. Revenge setup. Not everybody can make the pain inside that setup feel like the fuel for world-class action. The cast helps a lot too. Joe Taslim instantly gives the movie genre credibility. If you know Taslim from The Raid, Warrior, Mortal Kombat, or even smaller turns where he brings that coiled physical danger to the screen, then you already know what he adds to a movie like this. He does not just make fight scenes better. He raises the temperature of the entire film because his presence suggests the action is going to matter. And paired with Xie Miao as Wang Wei, the father at the center of the story, the movie gets an effective two-pronged dynamic. One man driven by personal desperation, the other by a more investigative, harder-edged determination. That pairing is smart, because one of the easiest ways for this kind of story to go flat is to make the protagonist too simple. If all he has is rage, the movie burns out. But if the film gives him a counterweight, another man with his own grief, his own goal, and his own way of moving through violence, then suddenly the story has friction. It has contrast. It has room for personality. And based on everything surrounding this movie, personality seems to be one of its biggest assets. That is probably why people keep comparing it to The Raid. Now, I want to be careful with that comparison because The Raid has become one of those near-sacred titles in action cinema, and people throw its name around to casually whenever a movie is brutal and fast. But in this case, I get it. The comparison is not just about violence, it is about density. The sense that the movie turns into an extended combat labyrinth where each new obstacle is more punishing than the last. The sense that the choreography is not there just to decorate the story, but to become the story's pulse. That is a very specific compliment, and it tells me The Furious is operating in a much more ambitious lane than simple dad revenge movie, and that lane makes the R rating feel essential, not cosmetic. Lionsgate has this film rated R for strong bloody violence and language, and that sounds exactly right. This does not look like a movie that wants to flirt with danger while still keeping one foot in studio-safe territory. It looks like a film that understands the ugliness of trafficking, the desperation of parental terror, and the raw appeal of watching monsters get demolished in the most painful ways possible. When you pair a theme like child trafficking with this level of physical punishment, the movie is tapping into something universal and ugly. People do not need complicated moral math here. They want the villains destroyed. The film seems to understand that with almost alarming clarity. That is why the setup works so well emotionally, even though it is familiar, because trafficking stories immediately create absolute stakes. There is no ambiguity, no soft middle ground. The villains are beyond redemption in the viewer's mind almost instantly, which means the movie does not have to waste time manufacturing reasons for the audience to want blood. It already has that. The question becomes whether the film can turn that hatred into something artistically and viscerally satisfying. Everything we have seen so far suggests yes. One of the details that really sticks with me is the talk around the movie's giant multi-fighter set piece. The one reportedly shot over 18 days. That kind of effort tells me Tanigaki and his team were not just aiming for brutality, but for escalation with structure. The best action films understand that set pieces cannot all hit the same way. They need to build, mutate, and surprise. If The Furious has a 5-person fight sequence that people are already singling out as one of the film's crown jewels, then it probably means the movie knows exactly when to widen the chaos and when to tighten the screws, and that matters. Because action without modulation becomes noise. Great action becomes narrative. The other thing helping this movie is timing. Lionsgate is putting it in theaters on May 29, 2026, which feels like a smart move. It gives the film room to arrive as a nasty, word-of-mouth action title instead of burying it in prestige season traffic. And because the trailer has such a hard, immediate identity, it looks like the kind of film that could find its audience very quickly if even a fraction of the buzz translates. The people who love bone-crunching fight cinema already know when something real is coming. They can feel it. The Furious has that smell. So where do I land on this? I think The Furious looks like exactly the kind of movie that takes an old revenge skeleton and rebuilds it through sheer physical invention. I think the Taken comparison is useful as a hook, but honestly too small as a destination. This does not look like Taken with harder punches. It looks like Taken getting dropped into a martial arts nightmare, where every hallway becomes a death chamber and every rescue step costs blood. That is much more exciting, and if the early reactions are even half right, then this may not just be one of the year's best action movies. It may be one of the clearest reminders that action cinema still hits hardest when it has pain, purpose, and absolute conviction behind every strike. So now, I want to know what you think. Does The Furious look like a true next-level action breakout? Or do you think people are letting the Rotten Tomatoes score and festival buzz push the hype a little too far? And more importantly, is this the kind of movie that can actually step into the space Taken once owned? Or is it doing something even nastier and better than that comparison suggests? That is the real question, and May 29th is looking violent. I'll see you in the next one.